Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime. This podcast explores real cases involving violence, loss, and the darker side of human nature. Some details may be confronting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. On a quiet street in Lennox Head, a mother vanished in the night, and more than 30 years later, nobody has found her. Lennox Head, a small coastal town on the far north coast of New South Wales. In 1993, it was a place where life moved a little slower. The ocean shaped the rhythm of the community. The seasons marked the passing of time. Neighbours knew each other, children played outside. Families built their lives around ordinary routines. The kind of routines that feel permanent, until one day they're not. Because every town has a place where memories are created, a street where families grow, a home where children learn what safety feels like. And sometimes, without warning, those same places become connected to a story that nobody ever expected to tell. On one quiet street in Lennox Head was a home on Sandstone Crescent, and inside that home lived a woman by the name of Bronwyn Winfield. Before she became a name in a missing persons investigation, before her photograph appeared in newspapers, before her story became one of Australia's longest-running mysteries, Bronwyn was simply Bronwyn, a mother, a daughter, a friend. A woman with a life that existed far beyond the questions that would later surround her disappearance. Bronwyn Winfield was 31 years old. She was raising 2 young daughters who were the centre of her world. Like many mothers, her days were built around ordinary moments. School mornings, meals prepared at the end of a busy day, the sounds of children moving through the house, the quiet moments after bedtime when the world finally became still. These moments can feel insignificant while they are happening, but they are the moments families remember the most when someone is gone. Because a person's life is not defined by the moment they disappear. It's defined by everything that came before. The conversations, the memories, the small routines that make up who they were. Bronwyn was not a missing person, not yet. She was a woman living her life, a woman trying to make decisions about her future. A woman trying to create stability for herself and her children during a difficult period. By 1993, Bronwyn's marriage to John Winfield had broken down. The relationship that had once created a family home had reached a point where Bronwyn felt she needed to make changes. She began thinking about what her life would look like outside the marriage, what the future would hold, how she could move forward. The breakdown of a relationship rarely happens because of one single moment. It's usually a collection of moments, arguments, silences, distance, conversations that become harder to have. 2 people who once shared the same future slowly finding themselves moving in different directions. For Bronwyn, the decisions ahead were not only about herself. She was a mother. Every choice involved her children, their security, their home, their sense of normality. Leaving a relationship is never simple. But leaving when children are involved means carrying the weight of every decision. Where will they live? How will their lives change? How do you create a new beginning while trying to protect the people you love most? From the outside, Sandstone Crescent looked like any other family home. A place where children should have felt safe. A place filled with ordinary memories. A place where a family had built their everyday life. But inside that home, things had become increasingly difficult. Bronwyn later wrote about this period of her life. She described the feelings of loneliness and unhappiness within the marriage. She expressed a desire for something different, a future where she felt heard, where she felt respected, where she could express herself openly. And eventually, Bronwyn made a decision. She left the family home with her 2 daughters. Leaving a home is never just about leaving a building. It's about leaving behind a life that existed inside those walls. The bedrooms, the memories, the routines, the place where children had grown. But Bronwyn's separation from John was not straightforward. The family home remained a point of conflict. After Bronwyn left, the locks on the Sandstone Crescent property were changed. The home that she had shared with her family was no longer accessible to her. Then John travelled to Sydney on business, and while he was away, Bronwyn made a decision. She was returning home. Bronwyn arrived back at Sandstone Crescent with her daughters, but when she reached the house, she discovered that she couldn't enter. The locks had been changed, the place where her children had slept, the place where her belongings remained, the place that she still considered her home. It was closed to her. Bronwyn contacted a locksmith and the lock was changed. The door opened and Bronwyn and her daughters moved back into the house. For a very short time, life returned to something familiar. The same rooms, the same street, the same surroundings, but everything was different. The marriage had broken down, the future was uncertain, and the situation inside that home was unresolved. John was still away in Sydney, but somehow he became aware that Bronwyn had returned, and he came back to Lennox Head. At the time, nobody knew how significant that moment would become. The marriage had ended. 2 people facing an uncertain future, and a woman who would disappear only days later. Sunday morning arrived in Lennox Head. For most people, it was an ordinary day. The kind of day that passes without anyone realising it will later become a date remembered forever. A morning coffee, a conversation, children moving through the house, the familiar sounds of family life. Nobody waking that morning knew they were living through the final day that Bronwyn Winfield would ever be seen alive. At Sandstone Crescent, Bronwyn was back inside the family home with her 2 young daughters. The house looked the same. The rooms were the same. The street outside was the same. But the circumstances inside the home had changed completely. A marriage had broken down. A family was trying to navigate separation. And 2 people who had once built a life together were now facing a future none of them had planned. John had returned from Sydney. Bronwyn was back in the house. And whatever happened between them after that point would become one of the most important parts of the investigation into her disappearance. At the time, though, it was still a home. A place where two young girls were spending time with both of their parents. A place where, despite everything that had happened, life continued. The hours of that Sunday passed. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. The ordinary rhythm of the day slowly moved toward night. And as the sun disappeared over Lennox Head, Sandstone Crescent became quieter. Inside that house were the final known hours of Bronwyn Winfield's life. A mother, a daughter, a friend. A woman whose future was still unwritten. What happened inside that home that night would later become the centre of years of investigation. But what is known is this. At some point during the night of the 16th of May 1993, Bronwyn Winfield disappeared. She vanished, and she would never be seen again. And from that moment, the story of the night would be told through different accounts, different memories, different interpretation of what happened inside Sandstone Crescent. John Winfield has consistently maintained that Bronwyn left the house voluntarily after an argument. He has denied any involvement in her disappearance and has never been charged over Bronwyn's death. According to his account, the evening involved an argument between them. He said Bronwyn made a phone call to another person. He said she later left with that person. But for investigators, the question was not simply whether Bronwyn had left. The question was what happened after she was last seen. Because in any disappearance investigation, the final confirmed moments become critical. Every movement matters. Every conversation matters. Every person connected to the timeline matters. Who saw Bronwyn last? What time was she last known to be alive? Where did she go? Did she leave the house? And if she did, where did she go from there? These questions would remain unanswered for decades. At some point after dark, the house became quiet. The street outside settled. The neighbourhood slept. Inside the home were Bronwyn's two daughters. And sometime after those final known hours, Bronwyn disappeared. The next morning, Sandstone Crescent still stood. The home remained. The street remained. The people connected to that house remained. But Bronwyn Winfield was no longer there. For a family, the disappearance of someone they love creates a moment where time seems to stop. But for Bronwyn's case, the clock continued moving. And those first hours, those first days, would become some of the most important moments in the entire investigation. Monday morning arrived. The sun rose over Lennox Head. The community continued with everyday life. People went to work, children went to school. the world continued moving. But inside the Winfield family, something was missing. Bronwyn was gone. The question seemed simple. Where had she gone? But the answer would prove far more complicated. Because Bronwyn was not someone who could simply disappear without explanation. She was a mother. Her daughters were young. Her life was connected to family, friends, and the community around her. John drove his daughters, Crystal and Lauren, to Sydney, where he left them with his former wife before continuing on to work. As the days passed, concern began to grow. Something was wrong. But Bronwyn's disappearance was not immediately reported to police. And that delay would later become one of the most examined parts of the case. 11 days. That number would become one of the most significant details connected to the Bronwyn Winfield disappearance. 11 days between the last confirmed sighting of Bronwyn and the moment she was reported missing. In a missing persons investigation, time matters. The first hour matters. The first night matters. The first conversations matter. Those moments are when memories are the freshest. When movements can be confirmed. When evidence can be found. When answers still may be close. But by the time police were contacted, those moments had already passed. On the 27th of May 1993, John Winfield reported Bronwyn missing. Her name entered the police system. Her photograph became connected to a question no family ever wants to ask. Where is Bronwyn Winfield? For her daughters, life had suddenly changed. Their mother was gone, but there was no goodbye, no explanation, no final conversation that they could hold on to. For Bronwyn's family, there was no certainty, only questions. And for investigators, the challenge was immediate. They needed to understand what had happened during the days before Bronwyn disappeared. Who had seen her? Who had spoken to her? What happened inside Sandstone Crescent? And what happened during those 11 days before anyone knew she was missing? Because somewhere between the last time Bronwyn was seen and the moment that her disappearance was reported was the key to understanding what happened. But in Bronwyn Winfield's case, those early days would become one of the most criticised parts of the story. Those criticisms have been raised by family members, former investigators, journalists, and other commentators. But police have not publicly accepted that the investigation was mishandled. With concerns raised about missed opportunities and inquiries that may not have been undertaken at the time. New South Wales Police continue to list the case as unsolved, suspected homicide and have offered a reward. When someone disappears, the first days cannot be recreated. A witness who could have remembered something clearly may later only remember fragments. A conversation that could have provided answers may become impossible to confirm. A person's movements may become harder to establish, and the evidence that may once have existed can disappear with time. For Bronwyn's family, those early days represented something they could never get back. The opportunity to know, the opportunity to search, the opportunity to understand what happened while the trail was still fresh. One of the difficulties surrounding Bronwyn's case was that people who may have held information were not all spoken to at the time. Witnesses who could have helped create a clearer picture of Bronwyn's final days were not necessarily interviewed when memories were still fresh. And as the years passed, investigators were left trying to rebuild a timeline from information that remained, trying to recover pieces of a story after decades had already gone by. The days became weeks, the weeks became months, and Bronwyn remained missing. For her family, there was no closure. There was no funeral, no goodbye, no place where they could go and grieve. Only the painful reality of uncertainty. A missing person case is not only about the person who has disappeared. It's also about the people left behind. The people waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for someone to arrive with answers, waiting for someone to say, "We found her." But for Bronwyn's family, that moment has never come. By the time detectives reopened the file, nearly a decade had already passed. But Bronwyn Winfield's name did not disappear. Because cases like this do not simply end because time moves forward. They remain in police files, in family memories, in the unanswered questions that refuse to go away. And eventually, Bronwyn's disappearance would be looked at again. Cold cases are not reopened because detectives expect an easy answer. They're reopened because someone looks at the file and believes the story is not finished. By the late 1990s, Bronwyn Winfield had been missing for years. The original investigation had produced no body, no confession, and no clear explanation for her disappearance. But experienced investigators began reviewing the file with fresh eyes. They examined the timeline. The circumstances appeared increasingly suspicious. A mother disappears. Her young children remain behind. No confirmed sighting after the night she vanished. An 11-day delay before she is reported missing. A husband who says that she left voluntarily. And no evidence that she intended to abandon her daughters. Detectives began reconstructing the final known days of Bronwyn's life. Who spoke to her? Who saw her? What plans she had made? What was happening in her marriage? They were no longer asking whether she was missing. They were asking whether she had been killed. Reinvestigating a years-old disappearance is like trying to rebuild a shattered mirror after many of the pieces have already been lost. Witnesses move away, memories fade, documents disappear, details become uncertain. Investigators are forced to work with fragments. One detective later described the challenge as trying to recover the conversation after everyone involved had forgotten exactly what was said. The review eventually led police to treat the case as a suspected homicide, and that change was significant. A missing person investigation searches for someone who may still be alive. A homicide investigation searches for the truth about how someone died. The focus shifts. Relationships are examined more closely. Timelines are tested more aggressively. Statements are compared for inconsistencies, and every action taken before and after the disappearance becomes potentially important. Years later, a dedicated cold case investigation was launched. Detectives returned to Sandstone Crescent. The house was examined again. Neighbours were re-interviewed. Investigators searched for anything that might have survived the passing of time. It was an extraordinary task. They were looking for evidence connected to a night that occurred more than 15 years earlier. Think about that. 15 years of weather. 15 years of cleaning. 15 years of renovations, repairs, and ordinary life. Finding meaningful forensic evidence after such a delay is exceptionally difficult. Yet the search continued. Because sometimes cold cases are solved not by dramatic discoveries, but by persistence. A witness remembers a forgotten detail. A relationship changes. A person who was once afraid decides to speak. A seemingly insignificant fact suddenly makes sense when it's viewed alongside other pieces of information. In 2010, New South Wales Police publicly renewed their appeal for information, and they announced a reward in connection with Bronwyn's disappearance and suspected murder. The announcement was a message to the community. This case had not been forgotten. Investigators believe someone still knew what happened. For Bronwyn's family, the renewed investigation brought a complicated mix of emotions: hope, fear, exhaustion. After so many years, every new development carried the possibility of answers and the possibility of more disappointment. Public appeals in cold cases are often directed at a single unknown person. The person who has remained silent. The person who heard something. The person who saw something. The person who has carried a secret for decades. Investigators know that time changes people. Loyalties shift, relationships end. Consciences grow heavier. And information that once felt impossible to reveal may eventually become impossible to keep. But despite renewed searches, renewed interviews, and renewed public attention, the central mystery remained. Bronwyn Winfield was still missing. No body was found. No one was charged. And the investigation continued to move through time, carrying with it the same unanswered question that had existed since 1993. What happened inside that house on the night Bronwyn disappeared? Cold case investigations are searches through time. They require investigators to return to the beginning, to look again at what was known, what was missed, what was overlooked, what information may never have been collected. The investigation had to be rebuilt. The timeline had to be re-examined. The events of 1993 had to be looked at through a different lens. Because after years without answers, the question changed. It was no longer simply, where did Bronwyn go? It became, what happened to Bronwyn Winfield? As investigators examined the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, the case changed. Bronwyn's disappearance was no longer treated simply as a missing person matter. Police came to suspect that Bronwyn had been murdered. But proving what happened in a case like this is incredibly difficult, because investigators were still facing the same obstacles that existed from the beginning. There was no body, no confirmed location where Bronwyn had been taken. No single piece of evidence that could reveal exactly what happened after she disappeared. Instead, the investigation depended on the pieces that remained: the timeline, the witnesses, the circumstances, the information gathered over years. In a case without a body, every detail carries weight. Every statement, every memory, every decision made before and after the disappearance. Because somewhere within those details was the answer. Somewhere was the moment where Bronwyn Winfield's story changed. A normal Sunday night, a family home, a woman who should have had a future ahead of her, and instead a mystery that would last for decades. For Bronwyn's daughters, time continued moving forward without their mother. They grew older. They experienced milestones. They lived their lives. But they did so carrying a loss that had never been fully explained. A loss without answers, without certainty, without a final goodbye. And for investigators, the search continued. Because even after years had passed, even after memories had faded, even after the trial had grown cold, Bronwyn Winfield was not forgotten. The case continued moving forward, and eventually it would reach another significant stage. A stage where evidence would be examined publicly, where information would be considered, and where a coroner would attempt to answer one of the most difficult questions possible: what happened to Bronwyn Winfield? For almost a decade, Bronwyn Winfield's family lived with uncertainty. Years passed, seasons changed, her daughters grew older. But the questions remained. What happened on the night Bronwyn disappeared? Where was she taken? And would the truth ever be known? When a person disappears and there are circumstances suggesting they may have died, there is a process designed to examine those unanswered questions: a coronial inquest. A coronial inquest is not a criminal trial. It does not decide whether someone is guilty. It does not determine whether someone should be convicted. Those decisions belong to a criminal court. Instead, a coroner examines the circumstances surrounding a person's death. The purpose is to establish, where possible, who the person was, when they died, where they died, how they died, and what circumstances surrounded their death. For Bronwyn Winfield, the inquest provided an opportunity to examine the information available after years of uncertainty, to look again at the events surrounding her disappearance, to consider the timeline, the evidence, the circumstances, and the questions that had remained unanswered since 1993. In 2002, a coronial inquest was held into Bronwyn Winfield's disappearance. The evidence considered during the inquest examined the circumstances surrounding the night she vanished. A woman who had been alive on the 16th of May, 1993. A woman who was never seen again. A mother whose disappearance had left a family searching for answers. In 2002, Deputy State Coroner Karl Milanovic found that Bronwyn Winfield had died on or about 16th of May 1993. The coroner also recommended that a known person be considered for criminal charges, but that the finding was not a criminal conviction. The New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions later determined that there was insufficient evidence to proceed with a prosecution. For her family, that finding brought a devastating certainty. Bronwyn had not simply walked away. She had not chosen to leave behind her daughters. She had not chosen to disappear from the people who loved her. She was taken. But knowing someone has died is not the same as knowing exactly what happened. A coronial finding can answer some questions, but it cannot answer every question. The inquest would acknowledge that Bronwyn had died. It could examine the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, but it could not provide the one thing her family wanted most: a full explanation. The truth of exactly what happened during those final hours. And a coronial inquest cannot replace a criminal trial. The standard of proof in a criminal court is different. A person cannot be convicted because something appears likely. A coronial inquest cannot determine criminal guilt. Any prosecution would require a separate court process, and no one has been convicted. And without sufficient evidence to meet that standard, no person has ever been convicted of Bronwyn Winfield's death. When the coronial inquest ended, the courtroom became silent. Papers were gathered, chairs were pushed back. People walked out into the light. But for Bronwyn's family, the story did not end when the hearing finished. A coronial finding can bring recognition. It can bring public acknowledgement that a person did not simply disappear. But it cannot restore what was lost. The coroner found that Bronwyn had died on or about the time of her disappearance. For her daughters, that finding carried enormous emotional weight. For years, they had lived with uncertainty. Now there was an official recognition that their mother was gone. Yet another question immediately followed. If the system accepted that Bronwyn Winfield had died, would anyone be held accountable? The case was considered by the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, and this is an important distinction. A coroner may find findings and recommendations, but prosecutors must decide whether there is enough admissible evidence to prove a criminal charge beyond a reasonable doubt in the court of law. And those are very different tasks. A suspicion, even a strong one, is not enough. A criminal prosecution requires evidence capable of persuading a jury. And after reviewing the case, prosecutors concluded there was insufficient evidence to proceed. No murder charges would be laid. No trial will take place. No jury heard the evidence. For many families, that is one of the hardest outcomes to understand. The law may acknowledge that a loved one is dead, yet still be unable to prosecute anyone for causing that death. It's a large gap between suspicion and proof, a gap that can feel unbearable. Bronwyn's family were left with a painful contradiction: an official finding that she had died and no criminal conviction. Time moved forward. The children who lost their mother became adults. They built lives, relationships and futures. But they carried with them a question that never fully left. What happened to Mum? That question does not remain in the past. It appears at birthdays, at weddings, at family gatherings, at moments when a mother should be present. Years later, renewed media attention brought the case back into public conversation. Journalists revisited the evidence. Former investigators spoke about the difficulties of the inquiry. New witnesses claimed to remember details from 1993. And once again, Bronwyn's photograph appeared before the public. For some people, it was the first time they had heard her name. For her family, it was a reminder that the search was still continuing. One of the enduring themes of this case is the passage of time. 30 years is long enough for children to become middle-aged adults. It's long enough for memories to fade, long enough for witnesses to die, long enough for evidence to disappear, but not long enough for a family to stop wanting answers. Cold cases survive because someone keeps asking questions. A detective, a journalist, a podcaster, a family member, a friend. Someone who refuses to accept silence as the final chapter. And so Bronwyn Winfield's case remains open. Not resolved, not forgotten, open. Waiting for that piece of information that has not been found yet. A quiet coastal town, a family home, a mother who vanished in the night, and a search that has now lasted more than 3 decades. The case remained open, the questions remained, and the search continued. More than 30 years have passed since Bronwyn Winfield's disappearance. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a woman with plans for the future, a woman who mattered. For her daughters, the years have continued, but the questions have not. What happened on the night of the 16th of May, 1993? Where is Bronwyn? Cold cases don't close with time. They close when someone remembers, when someone finds the courage to speak. If you know anything, no matter how small, you can contact Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or submit information anonymously online. Every unanswered case has 2 victims. The one who's missing and the family who waits. Until Bronwyn is found, until the truth is known, her story remains unfinished. This has been Coffee and Crime AU. Thank you for listening. If you would like to support the podcast, hear early access episodes, and explore exclusive case files and deep dives, visit coffeeandcrimeau.com.au. I'm Linda. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next case. Not every case finds closure. Not every question gets answered. And sometimes the truth stays buried long after the headlines fade. This has been Coffee and Crime AU. For deeper into the case, visit Coffee and Crime AU online. Until next time.